truth is that the last refuge for the terminally alienated is dissociation from the world, which, as I've already said, ADHD and autism are extreme examples of. I might mention that the paralysed can't cope with anything aptly titled snowflake millennials are now describing themselves as the burnout generation. Although unable to acknowledge their extreme psychosis from the end play state of the human condition as a real reason for their burnout, they are blaming it on such superficial causes as stress from the overuse of smartphones and from the 2008 financial crisis, to being scared of the world due to intensive helicopter parents, and in general to the mental load produced by the systems of capitalism and patriarchy. Note, capitalism and patriarchy are explained in part 2. Yes, the truth is that if the relieving understanding of the human condition that is about to be presented here hadn't been found, then unimaginable and unthinkable terminal levels of writhing and deadening alienation or psychosis and the extinction of humankind were just around the corner. Given the resigned mind's human condition evading, truth avoiding, put on a brave face, everything is basically fine and we're doing well, massively deluded strategy, it is really to an unresigned adolescent mind that we should go for a truly accurate description of the seriousness of our species' plight to conclude part 1. And that's exactly what we have in these clearly unresigned, denial-free, honest lyrics from the 2010 Grievances album of the young American heavy metal band With Life in Mind. It scares me to death to think of what I have become. I feel so lost in this world. Our innocence is lost. I scream to the sky, but my words get lost along the way. I can't express all the hate that's led me here and all the filth that swallows us whole. I don't want to be part of all this insanity, famine and death, pestilence and war. Famine, death, pestilence, and war are traditional interpretations of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse described in Revelation 6 in the Bible. Christ referred to similar signs of the end of the age in Matthew and Luke. A world shrouded in darkness, fear is driven into our minds everywhere we look, trying so hard for a life with such little purpose, lost in oblivion. Everything you've been told has been a lie. We've all been asleep since the beginning of time. Why are we so scared to use our minds? Keep pretending, soon enough things will crumble to the ground. If they could only see the truth, they would coil in disgust. How do we save ourselves from this misery, so desperate for the answers? We're straining on the last bit of hope we have left. No one hears our cries, and no one sees us screaming, this is the end. Yes, truly, as Bob Dylan wrote and sang in his 1973 song, Knocking on Heaven's Door, it's getting too dark to see. I feel I'm knocking on heaven's door. Our species is about to die. Saying, I scream to the sky, but my words get lost along the way. I can't express all the hate that led me here and all the filth that swallows us whole. I don't want to be part of all this insanity, famine and death, pestilence and war, all of which is happening in our supposedly normal and reasonably healthy and happy world, is exactly what Edvard Munch's famous painting, The Scream, captures, a reproduction of which appears at this point in this booklet. And saying, everything you've been told has been a lie, reiterates the extent of the dishonest denial in the world, especially in science today. And saying, so desperate for the answers, confirms how incredibly important are the answers about our human condition that are now going to be presented. After sending this booklet to the printers, an article from the Wall Street Journal by Ed Ballard was reprinted in the Australian newspaper on the 26th of August 2016 with the title, Yeats's Words Suit Our Grim Times. Due to its confirmation of all that has just been said, we delayed the printing to allow this reference to be added. Employing the same words as I have, the article is about the now widespread feeling that something appalling is around the corner for humanity. As evidence of that fear, Ballard cites the recent frequency of references in the media to the chilling words I've underlined from W.B. Yeats' prophetic 1919 poem, The Second Coming. turning and turning in the widening gyre. The falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart, the centre cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. The blood-dimmed tide is loosed, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. Surely some revelation is at hand. Surely the second coming is at hand. The second coming, hardly are those words out, when a vast image out of Spiritus Mundi troubles my sight. Somewhere in the sands of the desert, a shape with lion body in the head of a man, a gaze blank and pitiless as the sun, is moving its slow thighs, while all about it reel shadows of the indignant desert birds. The darkness drops again, but now I know that 20 centuries of stony sleep were vexed to nightmare by a rocking cradle, and what's rough beast its hour come round at last, slouches towards Bethlehem to be born. To mention just one of Ballard's statistics, in the first 7 months of this year, the line, "the centre cannot hold," has been used 249 times in newspapers, news sites and blogs, a figure already level with last year's record total. Note how 20 centuries of stony sleep echoes with life in minds we've all been asleep since the beginning of time. The latter part of Yeats's poem is about the subconscious nightmare fear all humans have of the arrival of the revelation, Judgment Day, all exposing, pitiless as the sun, rough, hurtful beast, of the truth about their massively corrupted condition, an unjustified fear that is dealt with later in part 3. The true, contexted meaning of the second coming is given in paragraph 1278 of Freedom. Part 2. The Truthful Biology. What I will now present is the fully accountable, truthful biological explanation of human behaviour, which is outlined in Chapter 1 and presented in detail in Chapter 3 of Freedom. This is a critically important part of my presentation today because it presents the understanding that saves our species from imminent, appalling terminal psychosis and extinction. Clearly, what's been needed to haul the human race out of this cesspit of deceit and the psychological trauma it's creating, this deathly dark cave of denial the human race, including its vehicle for inquiry science, has been living in, and the extreme and terrible psychosis that such disconnection from our true selves is causing, is a completely fresh approach to biological thinking that truthfully recognizes the association between the emergence of consciousness in humans and the corruption of our original cooperative, all-loving instinctive state. And in fact, when that honest approach is taken, the fully accountable, true biological explanation of our competitive, selfish, and aggressive behavior becomes reasonably obvious. Because it makes sense that when our species became fully conscious, a battle must have broken out between it and our already established instinctive self, and that this internal conflict caused us to become angry, egocentric, and alienated, to become psychologically upset sufferers of the human condition. Even if we put aside the fact that we have cooperative loving instincts and just look at the fundamental situation an animal species would face if it developed a fully conscious mind in the presence of already established instinctive orientations, we can see how a psychologically upsetting conflict between those already established instinctive orientations and its newly emerged, self-adjusting conscious mind would have to occur. To help visualize this development, consider the situation of a migrating bird that has just acquired a fully conscious mind. Many bird species are perfectly oriented to instinctive migratory flight paths. Each winter, without ever learning where to go and without knowing why, they quit their established breeding grounds and migrate to warmer feeding grounds. They then return each summer, and so the cycle continues. Over the course of thousands of generations and migratory movements, Only those birds that happened to have a genetic makeup that inclined them to follow the right route survived. Thus, through natural selection, they acquired their instinctive orientation. So imagine a flock of migrating storks returning to their summer breeding nests on the rooftops of Europe from their winter feeding grounds in the swamps of southern Africa. Suppose, in the instinct-controlled brain of one of them, we place a fully conscious mind. We will call the stork Adam because we will soon see that up to a point, this analogy parallels the old, pre-scientific biblical account of Adam and Eve taking the fruit from the tree of knowledge, that is, becoming conscious. As Adam's stork flies north, he spots an island off to the left with a tree laden with apples. Using his newly acquired conscious mind, Adam thinks, I should fly down there and eat some apples. It seems a reasonable thought, but he can't know if it is a good decision or not until he acts on it. For Adam's new thinking mind to make sense of the world, he has to learn by trial and error, and so he decides to carry out his first grand experiment in self-management by flying down to the island and sampling the apples. But it's not that simple. As soon as Adam's conscious thinking self deviates from his established migratory path, his innocent instinctive self, innocent in the sense of being unaware or ignorant of the need to search for knowledge, tries to pull him back on course. In following the flight path past the island, Adam's instinct-obedient self is, in effect, criticizing his conscious mind's decision to veer off that course. It is condemning his search for understanding. All of a sudden, Adam is in a dilemma. If he adheres to the route his instinctive self is following and flies back on course, his instincts will be happy, but he'll never learn if his deviation was the right decision or not. All the messages he's receiving from within inform him that obeying his instincts is good, is right. But there's also a new inclination to disobey, a defiance of instinct. Diverting from his course will result in apples and understanding, yet he already sees that doing so will make him feel bad. Uncomfortable with the criticism his newly conscious mind or intellect is receiving from his instinctive self, Adam's first response is to ignore the temptation the apples present and fly back on course. As he does, however, Adam realizes he can't deny his now questioning intellect. Sooner or later, he must find the courage to master his conscious mind by carrying out experiments and understanding. So, continuing to think, he then asks himself, why not fly down to an island and rest? Again, not knowing any reason why he shouldn't, Adam proceeds with this experiment, and again his decision is met with the same criticism from his instinctive self. But this time, Adam defies the criticism and perseveres with his experimentation in self-management. His decision, however, means he must now live with the criticism, and immediately he is condemned to a state of psychological upset. A battle has broken out between his instinctive self, which is perfectly oriented to the flight path, and his emerging conscious mind, which needs to understand why that flight path is the correct course to follow. His instinctive self is perfectly oriented, but Adam doesn't understand that orientation, and until he does, he is condemned to a divisive existence. In short, when the fully conscious mind emerged, it wasn't enough for it to be oriented by instincts. It had to find understanding to operate effectively and fulfill its great potential to manage life. But, tragically, the instinctive self didn't appreciate that need and tried to stop the mind's necessary search for knowledge as represented by the latter's experiments in self-management. Hence the ensuing battle between instinct and intellect. To refute the criticism from his instinctive self, Adam needed the discoveries that science has only recently given us of the difference in the way genes and nerves process information. In particular, he needed to be able to explain that the gene-based learning system can orientate species to situations, but is incapable of insight into the nature of change. Genetic selection of one reproducing individual over another reproducing individual, the selection in effect of one idea over another idea, or one piece of information over another piece of information, gives species adaptations or orientations, instinctive programming, for managing life. But those genetic orientations, those instincts, are not understandings. The nerve-based learning system, on the other hand, can, if sufficiently developed, understand change. Nerves were originally developed for the coordination of movement in animals, but once developed, their ability to store impressions, what we refer to as memory, gave rise to the potential to develop understanding of cause and effect. If you can remember past events, you can compare them with current events and identify regularly occurring experiences. This knowledge of, or insight into, what has commonly occurred in the past enables you to predict what is likely to happen in the future and to adjust your behavior accordingly. Once insights into the nature of change are put into effect, the self-modified behavior starts to provide feedback, refining the insights further. Predictions are compared with outcomes and so on. Much developed, nerves can sufficiently associate information to reason how experiences are related, learn to understand, and become conscious of, or aware of, or intelligent about the relationship between events that occur through time. Thus, consciousness means being sufficiently aware of how experiences are related to attempt to manage change from a basis of understanding. Again, the Adam Stork story and related aspects are fully described in chapters 1 and 3 of Freedom. What this means is that when the nerve-based learning system became sufficiently developed for consciousness to emerge, and with it the ability to understand the world, it wasn't enough to be instinctively oriented to the world. Conscious understanding of the world had to be found. The problem, of course, was that Adam had only just taken his first tentative steps in the search for knowledge, and so had no ability to explain anything. It was a catch-22 situation for the fledgling thinker, because in order to explain himself, he needed the very knowledge he was setting out to accumulate. He had to search for understanding, ultimately self-understanding, understanding of why he had to fly off course, without the ability to first explain why he needed to fly off course. And without that defense, he had to live with the criticism from his instinctive self and was insecure in its presence. It was an untenable position to maintain, and so to resist the tirade of unjust criticism he was having to endure and mitigate that insecurity, Adam had to do something. But what could he do? If he abandoned the search and flew back on course, he'd gain some momentary relief, but the search would nevertheless remain to be undertaken. So all Adam could do was retaliate against and attack the instinct's unjust criticism, attempt to prove the instinct's unjust criticism wrong, and try to deny or block from his mind the instinct's unjust criticism. And he did all those things. He became angry towards the criticism. In every way he could, he tried to demonstrate his self-worth, prove that he is good and not bad. He shook his fist at the heavens in a gesture of defiance of the implication that he is bad, and he tried to block out the criticism, this block-out or denial, including having to invent contrived excuses for his instinct-defying behavior. In short, his angry, egocentric, and alienated state appeared. Adam's intellect, or ego, which is just another word for the intellect, since the concise Oxford Dictionary defines ego as the conscious thinking self, became centered or focused on the need to justify itself, selfishly preoccupied, aggressively competing for opportunities to prove he is good and not bad, to validate his worth, to get a win, to essentially eke out any positive reinforcement that would bring him some relief from criticism and a sense of worth. In summary, Adam unavoidably became selfish, aggressive, and competitive. To illustrate this predicament, in the booklet there is a diagram of conscious Adam Stork defiantly resisting his instinctive self. All the seemingly bad aspects of the intellect and their opposite, seemingly good aspects of the instinct are depicted in the two columns that flank the Adam-Stork diagram. But again, without the knowledge he was seeking, without self-understanding, specifically the understanding of the difference between the gene and nerve-based learning systems that science has given us, Adam Stork had no choice but to resign himself to living a psychologically upset life of anger, egocentricity, and alienation as the only three responses available to him to cope with the horror of his situation. It was an extremely unfair and difficult, indeed tragic position for Adam to find himself in, for we can see that while he was good, he appeared to be bad and had to endure the horror of his psychologically distressed, upset condition until he found the real as opposed to the invented or contrived, not psychosis recognizing, defense or reason for his mistakes. Basically, suffering psychological upset was the price of Adam's heroic search for understanding. Again, this is the tragic yet inevitable situation any animal would have to endure if it transitioned from an instinct-controlled state to an intellect-controlled state. Its instincts would resist the conscious mind's deviating search for knowledge. Adam's uncooperative and divisive competitive aggression and his selfish, egocentric, self-preoccupied efforts to prove his worth and his need to deny and evade criticism essentially embrace a dishonest state. All became an unavoidable part of his personality. Such was Adam Stork's predicament, and such has been the human condition, for it was within our species that the fully conscious mind emerged. And the obvious compensations we humans became focused on, employing to try to validate ourselves, were power, fame, fortune, and glory. Yes, we can now understand that materialism, the big house, sparkling chandeliers, fancy clothes, etc., and the financial capital needed to supply it, which Sir Bob protests against, gave humans the fanfare and the glory we knew we were due, but which the world in its ignorance of our fundamental goodness would not give us. While spiritual relief, understanding, was still to be found, only material relief was available. Materialism and capitalism became the engine sustaining our necessary but horrifically upsetting search for understanding, ultimately for self-understanding, understanding of our corrupted human condition. Again, this entire predicament is the fundamental situation any animal species would encounter if they developed a fully conscious mind. But in the case of humans, we now have to consider how much worse the situation has been for us, because our instinctive orientation wasn't to a flight path, but to behaving utterly cooperatively and lovingly. In our case, when we began experimenting in understanding and were criticized by our instincts and unavoidably responded in an angry, egocentric and alienated way, we had to endure a further round of criticism, a second hit, a double whammy from our instinctive orientation. Yes, in our necessary search for understanding, we were first unjustly condemned for defying our instincts, and then again for reacting to that condemnation in a way that was completely counter and offensive to our loving, cooperative instincts. So if Adam Stork had cause to be upset, we had double cause. No wonder there has been an underlying volcanic frustration and anger in humans that periodically breaks out in unspeakable acts of violence, cruelty, and depravity. And no wonder we have had an insatiably greedy appetite for the artificial reinforcement that materialism could give us. We can now see that the biblical story of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden accurately describes the primary situation involved in our human condition of the psychologically upsetting battle that emerged between our instincts and our conscious intellect's search for knowledge. In Genesis, it says Adam and Eve, or we, took the fruit from the tree of knowledge and were disobedient. In other words, we developed a conscious mind and free will. But in that pre-scientific story, it says Adam and Eve then became perpetrators of sin, and as a result of becoming evil, were banished from the Garden of Eden, of our original cooperative and loving, innocent, instinctive state. The free dictionary definition of Edenic being the first home of Adam and Eve, a state of innocence, bliss, or ultimate happiness, whereas this scientific presentation reveals Adam and Eve to be the heroes, not the villains they have so long been portrayed as. So while humans are immensely upset, that is, immensely angry, egocentric, and alienated, we are good and not bad after all. And upset is the right word for our condition, because while we are not evil or bad, we are definitely psychologically upset from having to participate in humanity's heroic search for knowledge. Corrupted and fallen have been used to describe our condition, but they have negative connotations that we can now appreciate are undeserved. We had developed into angry, egocentric, and alienated people, but we were never going to accept the implication that we were fundamentally bad, evil, worthless, awful beings. We weren't going to wear that criticism, or if we did, we wouldn't be able to get out of bed each morning and face the world. If we truly believed we were fundamentally evil beings, we would shoot ourselves. No, there had to be a greater truth that explained our behavior, and until we found it, we couldn't rest. So for our species, it really has been a case of, as the saying goes, give me liberty or give me death. No retreat, no surrender, never back down. Or, as Sir Bob mentioned, death or glory. Our conscious thinking self was never going to give in to our instinctive self or soul. And so, every day as we got out of bed, we took on the world of ignorance that was condemning us. We shook our fist at the heavens in defiance of the implication that we are bad. In essence, we said, one day, we are going to prove our worth, explain that we are not bad after all, and until that day arrives, we are not going to back down. We are not going to take the ignorant, naive, stupid, unjustified criticism from our instincts. No, we are going to fight back with all our might. The photograph by Neil Leifer of Muhammad Ali standing over the vanquished Sonny Liston, that, according to Time magazine, is considered to be the greatest sports picture of the 20th century, is included here precisely because it perfectly expresses every human's desire, destructive as that could be, to vanquish our tormentor, which, at the deepest level, is ignorance of our fundamental worth and goodness. Yes, we were going to fight back against ignorance with all our might, and that is what we have done. That is what every conscious human who has ever lived has done. And because we did, because we persevered against all that criticism, we have now finally broken through and found the full truth that explains that humans are wonderful beings after all. In fact, not just wonderful, but the heroes of the whole story of life on Earth. This is because our fully conscious mind is surely, given its phenomenal ability to understand the world, nature's greatest invention. So for us humans who were given this greatest of all inventions to develop, to be made to endure the torture of being unjustly condemned as bad or evil for doing just that, and to have had to endure that torture for so long, some 2 million years, the time we have likely been fully conscious, has to make us the absolute heroes of the story of life on Earth. Humans were tasked the hardest, toughest of missions, and against all the odds, we completed it. Humans are the champions of the story of life on Earth. We are so wonderful. Yes, we can finally understand the absolutely extraordinary paradox that neither Shakespeare nor Pascal could fathom, of how on earth could we humans be godlike in our infinite faculty of reason and apprehension, a glorious, angel-like prodigy, capable of being a judge of all things and a repository of truth, and yet seemingly behave so appallingly that we appear to be monsters, imbeciles, a sewer of uncertainty and error, and chaos, the essence of dust, the scum of the universe. We have finally made sense of the seemingly nonsensical. And now that we have finally made sense of the seemingly impossible to explain paradox of how we humans could be good when all the evidence appeared to unequivocally indicate we were bad, all mythology can likewise be made sense of at last. For instance, why was Miguel de Cervantes' 1605 novel Don Quixote voted the greatest book of all time by the world's most acclaimed writers in a poll arranged by the Nobel Institute? Well, Don Quixote is the story of an elderly man who gets out of bed, renames himself Don Quixote of La Mancha, dons an old suit of armor, takes up an ancient shield and lance, mounts his skinny old horse, and calls on his loyal but world-weary companion, Sancho, to join him on the most spectacular of adventures. Coming across a field of large windmills, the noble knight says, "Look yonder, friend Sancho. There are outrageous giants whom I intend to deprive of life, and the expiration of that cursed brood will be an acceptable service to heaven." And it is in that vein that their crazed and hopeless adventure went on, gloriously doomed battle after gloriously doomed battle, feeble beings charging at and trying to vanquish the outrageous giant, ignorance of the fact of our species' fundamental goodness. But that has been the lot of every human for some 2 million years. Wave after wave of quixotic humans have thrown themselves at that outrageous giant of ignorance for eons and eons, as bit by tiny bit they accumulated the knowledge that would finally make the redeeming explanation of our human condition possible. A drawing by Jeremy Griffith of Don Quixote charging the windmills is included at this point in the booklet. Then included in the booklet is J.M.W. Turner's 1796 painting, Fisherman at Sea, because the text says it is another powerful portrayal of how absolutely incredibly heroic the human race has been, huddled together for some reassurance and with few provisions while we struggled as best we could through 2 million years of terrifying darkness and tumultuous storms to acquire that relieving knowledge. To be given a fully conscious brain, the marvelous computer we have on our heads, but not be given the program for it, and instead be left a restless wanderer on the earth, which is a quote from Genesis in the Bible, searching for that program or understanding in a dreadful darkness of confusion and bewilderment, most especially about our worthiness or otherwise as a species, was the most diabolical of tortures. As the great denial-free thinking prophet Isaiah put it, "Justice is far from us, and righteousness does not reach us. We look for light, but all is darkness, for brightness, but we walk in deep shadows. Like the blind, we grope along the wall, feeling our way like men without eyes. Truth is nowhere to be found." Turning to more recent cultural depictions, Turner's Fisherman at Sea recalls the lyrics that so plead the terrible agony of our species' seemingly lost, lonely, and meaningless condition. How does it feel to be on your own, with no direction home, like a complete unknown? The profundity of these words have understandably led to the 1965 song from which they come, like a rolling stone, by that prophet of our time and now Nobel laureate for literature, Bob Dylan, to be voted in 2011 as the greatest of all time by that arbiter of popular music, Rolling Stone magazine. Yes, how incredibly heroic have we humans been, and how wonderful beyond the powers of description is it to now have freed ourselves from that horrific situation where we look for light, but all is darkness. Truth is nowhere to be found. In summary, we humans had no choice but to persevere with our search for knowledge and suffer the psychologically upset state of being angry, alienated, and egocentric until we could develop the scientific method and through that vehicle for inquiry, find the redeeming explanation for our species' upset condition, of the difference between the gene and nerve-based learning systems, the key insight that reveals we humans are good and not bad after all. Yes, until science made it possible to explain the difference between the gene-based natural selection process that gives species orientations and the nerve-based conscious mind that needs to understand, every time we tried to think about our corrupted condition, the only conclusion we could come to was that we conscious humans had willfully destroyed paradise. So, despite having been dangerously mechanistic by avoiding the human condition, through the help of truthful human condition confronting thinking, science turns out to be the liberator, the messiah of humanity from the agony of the human condition. I want to mention that there have been many thinkers throughout history who have, like Moses with his Garden of Eden story, recognized that our psychologically upset human condition is a result of us humans having become conscious and at war with our instincts. But, as I say, it wasn't until science revealed the difference between instinctive orientations and conscious understandings that we were finally in a position to explain that humans are actually good and not bad. The instinct versus conscious intellect explanation of the human condition is in fact very obvious, and it shows just how wrong the old "we are competitive and aggressive because we have savage animal instincts" excuse is. A history of the true instinct versus intellect explanation of the human condition is presented in chapter 2.7 of Freedom and in Freedom Essay 53 on the WTM's home. Notably, all humans are variously upset from their different encounters with and degrees of engagement in knowledge. All humans are equally good. Everyone has variously had our species' original, innocent, instinctive state corrupted. Everyone is variously angry, egocentric, and alienated. But everyone is good, and not just good, but a hero of the story of life on Earth. No longer does humanity have to rely on dogmatic assertions that all men are created equal, purely on the basis that it is a self-evident truth, as the United States Declaration of Independence asserts, because we can now explain, understand, and know that the equality of goodness of all humans is a fundamental truth. We can now understand why each individual, gender, age, race, country, civilization, and culture is equally good and worthy, and that no one is superior or inferior, and that everyone deserves the rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Indeed, through this understanding, the whole concept of good and bad, basically of guilt, disappears from our conceptualization of ourselves. Compassion, love, and understanding for our human situation has finally been achieved, which is what Sir Lawrence van der Post recognized was needed when he variously wrote in his books. True love is love of the difficult and unlovable, and how can there ever be any real beginning without forgiveness? And that only by understanding how we were all a part of the same contemporary pattern of wars, cruelty, greed, and indifference could we defeat those dark forces with a true understanding of their nature and origin, and that compassion leaves an indelible blueprint on the recognition that life so sorely needs between one individual and another, one nation and another, one culture and another. It is also valid for the road which our spirit should be building now for crossing the historical abyss that still separates us from a truly contemporary vision of life and the increase of life and meaning that awaits us in the future. Yes, one day, which has now arrived, there had to be, to quote the Rolling Stones lyric, "Sympathy for the Devil," one day we had to find the reconciling, compassionate, healing understanding of the dark side of human nature. One day, the marriage of heaven and hell, as polymath William Blake titled his famous book, had to occur. So we now know that there was a good reason why we humans became corrupted. We had to search for knowledge, ultimately sufficient knowledge to explain the human condition. And it is necessary to emphasize here that there was no real way out of our psychologically upset condition until we found that redeeming understanding. Searching for knowledge made us angry, egocentric, and alienated, but that was the price we had to be prepared to pay. At any time, we could stop our upsetting search for knowledge, fly back on course in the Adam Stork analogy, which would make us feel good, stop the criticism from our instincts, but that was an abandonment of our fundamental responsibility as conscious beings to keep persevering with our search for knowledge and suffer all the upset that resulted from doing that until we found the knowledge we were after of the explanation of the human condition. This is a key point to make because it allows us to understand the real merits and liabilities of the left and right wings of politics. It turns out that of the twin political problems we have, of the brutality of the need to continue the corrupting search for knowledge free from condemning idealism, right wing, and the dishonest and deluded, I'm being good by flying back on course pseudo-idealism of the left wing, it was actually the corrupting, individualistic, materialistic, and capitalistic right wing that held the moral high ground, that was doing the right thing, being genuinely idealistic, because it was persevering with the necessary search for knowledge, whereas the pseudo-idealistic knowledge-blocking of the left actually been subverting the human journey. Such is the great paradox of the human condition that we can now finally understand. The truth was not as it appeared. The corrupting journey Adam Stork or the right wing were championing made them the heroes, not the villains. As it says about the great paradox of the human condition in the musical Man of La Mancha, that is based on the story of Don Quixote, we humans had to be prepared to march into hell for a heavenly cause. Understanding the human condition means the tables are turned on our perception of reality. The self-adjusting conscious mind turns out to be the hero, not the villain of the story of life on earth, the goody, while our unjustly condemning instinctive soul turns out to have been the cause of all our upset anger, egocentricity, and alienation, in fact, the baddie. To illustrate this change of perception, in the booklet there is a diagram of conscious Adam Stork defiantly resisting his instinctive self, with Adam described as the goody and his instinctive self as the baddie. In the columns on either side of the drawing, the many manifestations of those two aspects of ourselves are listed, with the goody Adam Stork column including the words evil, guilty, corrupted, immoral, selfish, egotistical, reason, science, materialism, alienated, dishonest, etc. And the baddie instinctive self column including the opposite words of good, innocent, pure, selfless, cooperative, and so on. Again, with the reconciling understanding of the human condition now found, neither aspect of our divided self is good or bad. Our instinct and intellect are reconciled. For example, as explained in the aforementioned chapter 3.9 of Freedom, The End of Politics, the very basis of the twin political problems of the left wing and right wing in politics is now completely obsoleted. Understanding brings the whole ugly, intransigent business of politics to an end. It needs to be emphasized here that when the blinds are finally drawn on the human condition, the light inevitably reveals a universe of previously denied truths, a litany of heresies. In fact, the arrival of understanding of the human condition brings about Honesty Day, or Truth Day, or Exposure Day, or Transparency Day, or Revelation Day, or so-called Judgment Day. But, as I have explained, it is a day of compassionate understanding, not of cruel judgment. In addition to the previously not properly understood and therefore unappreciated role of the right wing in politics, and the exposure of the left wing as fundamentally irresponsible and dishonestly deluded about being ideally behaved, the following are some of the heresies, which are fully explained in Freedom, that we now have to adjust to. That the human race has become an extremely upset, alienated wreck. That dishonest human condition avoiding mechanistic or reductionist science has been leading the human race to a state of terminal alienation. That humans have a cooperative, loving, instinctive heritage, not a brutish, savage, and aggressive one. That nurturing was the prime mover in human development and is still critically important. That sex as humans now practice it is not about trying to reproduce our genes, but rather it is a psychologically upset behavior where we resentfully attack innocence for its seeming criticism of our lack of innocence. That there are differences between races, ethnic groups, in their levels of corruption of and alienation from our species' original innocent instinctive state. Some races are less innocent than others, or to say it, this is an inevitable result of the upset state of the human condition having emerged in our species. Some races, just as some individuals, will have been more exposed to upset and become more adapted to it. While everyone is equally good and worthwhile, everyone is variously upset. Everyone has variously lost their innocence. As soon as you have a struggle of any sort, those involved are all going to be variously exposed to it and thus variously affected by it. It can't be any other way. But with the human condition at last resolved, all the upset in humans can now be repaired. The human race is now redeemed and everyone can be rehabilitated. That women are not mainframed to the battle of the human condition in the same way men are. They are not as understanding of and thus appreciative of battle as men are, simply because with women naturally occupied with the critical task of nurturing, the horrifically upsetting battle of searching for knowledge had especially to be taken up by men. Hence, society changed from being matriarchal to patriarchal. And with that battle now finally won, what is revealed is that men particularly are the heroes of the, as is explained in chapter 4, that the meaning of existence, which we have personified as God, is the teleological, holistic order of matter developing integrated physical law of negative entropy. And as explained in paragraphs 887 and 929 to 935, that Christ was not a deity, but a human like everyone else, only sufficiently nurtured with unconditional selfless love in his infancy to not have resigned to a life of dishonest denial of the issue of the human condition, a pure love that the innocence, symbolized by virginity, of Christ's mother made possible. So religions are now obsoleted with understanding, and, as will be described next in part 3 of this booklet, replaced with an infinitely more powerful and effective way of living, a meaningful, truth-aligned life free of your upset. So again, the truth is not as it appeared. The previously condemned intellect and all its manifestations turn out to be good and not bad, while the instinctive state and all its manifestations turn out to have been unjustly condemning of humanity's heroic search for knowledge. This turning of the tables will be an immense shock, as another truthful talking prophet of our time, Bono of the band U2, said recently, truthfulness will blow things apart. And yes, we will initially find all that exposure of our cave living evasions, denials, lies and delusions difficult to cope with. As playwright George Bernard Shaw said, all great truths begin as blasphemies. However, this blasphemous stage, when all the previously denied truths are suddenly revealed and we are in shock, won't last long once the wonderfully liberating potential of these understandings that is described in chapter 9 of Freedom and summarized next in part 3 catches on. And again, with the reconciling understanding of the human condition now found, neither aspect of our divided self is good or bad. Our instinct and intellect are reconciled. For example, as already explained, the very basis of the left wing and right wing in politics is now obsoleted, as is the prejudiced view of some individuals or races or genders or cultures being inferior or superior to others. Our ability now to explain and understand that we humans are actually good and not bad enables all the upset and associated misunderstanding and dysfunction that resulted from being unable to explain the source of our divisive condition to subside and disappear. Finding understanding of the human condition is what rehabilitates and transforms the human race from its psychologically upset state. In fact, as I mentioned in part 1, the word psychiatry literally means soul healing, derived as it is from psyche, meaning soul, and iatria, meaning healing. But we have never before been able to heal our soul. To truthfully explain to our original instinctive self or soul that our fully conscious thinking self is good and not bad, and by so doing reconcile and heal our split selves, get our old natural selves to join with our other conscious, willful, rational, scientific selves, as Sir Lawrence van der Post said we had to do. As Professor Harry Prosen says in his introduction to freedom about the psychological effect of this human race saving and thus world saving reconciling understanding of ourselves, I have no doubt the biological explanation of the human condition is the holy grail of insight we have sought for the psychological rehabilitation of the human race. It brings about the wholeness for humans that the great psychoanalyst Carl Jung was forever pointing out depends on the ability to own our own shadow, to understand the dark side of ourselves. As depicted in the final Adam Stork diagram included here, it reconciles our intellect and instinct and all their manifestations, thus enabling humans to become sound, secure, and whole again. It's been an astounding journey that humanity has negotiated from happy, innocent ignorance to a state of corrupted upset, to happy, upset-free soundness. A round of departure and return that was perfectly anticipated by that great poet T.S. Eliot when he wrote that we shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time. While it will take a number of generations for all our species' upset psychosis to be completely healed, the most important point to take on board is that with this clarifying understanding of our fundamental goodness, all of our psychologically defensive, angry, alienated, and egocentric behavior is immediately made redundant. As I explain in Chapter 9 of Freedom, and summarize next in Part 3 of this booklet, with the great burden of guilt lifted from the human race, the old insecure, defensive, and retaliatory upset life that went with it is finally over, which means we can all immediately leave that way of behaving behind. As finished with, we can immediately change from living competitively to living cooperatively, which is the great transformation in behavior that Sir Bob has long dreamed of. As Sir Bob's fellow rock star and fellow prophet of our time, Bono, anticipated in his songs, everyone will now be able to feel sunlight of liberating understanding on my face, see that dust cloud of all our upset behavior disappear without a trace. We will be able to take shelter from the poison rain high on a desert plain in a wonderful egoless new world, where the streets have no name, a place where there will be no toil or sorrow, no time of pain, and everyone will sing, I've conquered my past, the future is here at last. I stand at the entrance to a new world I can see. The ruins to the right of me will soon have lost sight of me, waiting to tell me what went wrong. He was looking forward to the arrival of freedom, the end of the human condition, with its beautiful cover showing the rising sun and people jumping for joy in front of it. Yes, now we really can have the dance in the street that Sir Bob didn't believe was possible when he was using the now obsoleted, dishonest, biological way of thinking about human behavior. I concluded my presentation. Part 3 will explain how this new truthful biology brings about the immediate transformation of the human race from the present tortured, insecure, human condition-stricken existence to a fabulous, secure, human condition-free life, thus stopping the madness, filling the void, bringing dignity to humans, giving the world hope, ending the despair, nourishing our dreams, and bringing about Yeats's revolution of the mind that Sir Bob so yearned. Part 3. The resulting immediate transformation of the human race. Note, Part 3 is a condensation of Chapter 9 of Freedom. You can watch videos of Jeremy explaining and describing this fabulous transformation at www.humancondition.com/transformation-videos. So, how is this fully accountable, true explanation of the human condition able to immediately transform your and everyone else's life? How does the arrival of the summer of self-understanding make it the time for a brand new beat and dancing in the street? How does the arrival of the sun on freedom's shore that we have been waiting for to explain the human condition and tell us what went wrong, bring about the first flash of Eden? Essentially, how does this explanation take us all back home again to our species' original Edenic state of togetherness and happiness? Only this time with the ability to understand that state, or, as T.S. Eliot wrote, know the place for the first time. The answer is a natural and logical consequence of our ability to finally be able to explain and understand the whole journey humanity has been on, and our situation now that understanding of the human condition has been found. To summarize, it was through the process of nurturing that our distant primate ancestors were able to develop a completely cooperative and loving existence, like the bonobos are in the process of developing today. We then became conscious, at which point a battle for the management of our lives began between our self-adjusting, conscious mind and our already established instinctive orientations. Unable to explain and understand why we had to challenge our instincts, we then became psychologically retaliatory, defensive, and insecure, upset sufferers of the angry, egocentric, and alienated human condition. But now, after 2 million years of searching, we have finally found the explanation and understanding for why we had to challenge our instincts, which ends the need for humans to be retaliatory, defensive, and insecure. The sunlight of understanding brings an end to our psychically upset, angry, egocentric, and alienated existence. The battle to establish our goodness and worth is over, which means we can finally put the sword down. The game is won, so we can all head for the showers, or however else we like to describe our own and our species' emancipation. A horrifically upset and stressful way of living ends, and a new life free of all that upset begins. Humans can finally return from a tormented, psychotic existence to health and happiness. The healing, however, of our species' upset, psychotic state, and the complete return to health and happiness for the human race that this breakthrough makes possible will, as has already been mentioned, take a number of generations. This is because psychoses usually take years to heal with understanding. So it follows that in the case of the largest psychosis of all, of the human condition, that healing process will naturally be a generational process. The big question that remains then is, how is this arrival of understanding of the human condition able to immediately transform your and every other human's life? How do you immediately transform your life from an insecure, psychologically embattled, upset state where you were deriving reinforcement for your sense of goodness and worth by winning as much power, fame, fortune and glory as you could, or by taking up support of some pseudo-idealistic cause like religion or socialism or environmentalism or feminism or political correctism or postmodernism or multiculturalism or anti-capitalism. To address this, I need to really drive home the fundamental situation you and every other human is now in. The battle for every human to prove his or her worth is over. In fact, to continue fighting to prove we are good and not bad when our fundamental goodness has been established is not only obviously pointless, but also unnecessarily destructive of ourselves, everyone around us, and of our world. That way of living is completely obsoleted, finished with. But when you are already resigned to living in denial of the human condition and have spent your entire adult life trying to sustain your sense of worth by seeking power, fame, fortune, and glory, or by supporting upset-relieving pseudo-idealistic causes, can that way of living suddenly be abandoned? Can humans give up a highly habituated existence from living competitively and selfishly to living cooperatively and lovingly? Or, in the case of supporters of pseudo-idealism, change from masquerading as an idealist to living honestly with the truth of their corrupted condition? The answer is a resounding yes. Humans can instantly change from living one way to living a completely different way. And for evidence that you and every other human can make such a change, we need only to look at what occurs in religious conversions. Although, as will be made very clear, the change this explanation makes possible is very different to a religious conversion. For example, in the case of a conversion to Christianity, when you drive past a Christian church and see one of the signs they place out front with Jesus is the answer, or be born again through Christ, or Christ is our Saviour, or give your life to Christ and be redeemed, we're all well aware that what's on offer is the option for people to give up their personal struggle with the human condition and take up a life of relieving deferment to Christ. While we may not have experienced a religious conversion ourselves, most of us will know someone who has. For example, the Simpsons cartoon series, a show that is immensely popular because it incisively reflects life's realities, features the character Ned Flanders, a Christian who has transcended his human condition-afflicted, upset existence and been born again, as the transformation is revealingly termed, to living cooperatively and lovingly again by deferring to and living through the relatively innocent and upset-free soundness of Christ. Ned's neighbour, Homer Simpson, on the other hand, is still living out a human condition-embattled, upset life to the full, drinking and brawling and crashing about in hapless efforts to validate himself. In one episode, for example, Ned lends Homer his lawnmower, which Homer ends up wrecking without remorse. But rather than getting angry or defensive, Ned simply accepts Homer's behaviour. Ned is a goody-goody Christian, while Homer is a prime example of an upset human, living out the battle of the human condition to the full. He is massively angry, egocentric, and alienated. So we humans do have the ability, if we so choose, to transcend our struggling to maintain our sense of self-worth, human condition-stricken existence, and live through the support of a set of ideal values and practice more loving behaviour than our upset self wants to practice. To use the Adam Stork analogy, Adam could always fly back on course, give up his upsetting pursuit of knowledge, and simply obey his instinctive orientations, which, for us humans, is to be cooperative and loving, the relatively innocent, uncorrupted, and upset-free way of living that is embodied in the lives of the great prophets around whom religions are founded. Humans can immediately abandon a must-win, competitive, selfish, and aggressive power, fame, fortune, and glory-seeking way of living, and instead live in a way that is supportive of and consistent with a cooperative, selfless, and loving way of living. However, what needs to be explained and emphasized straight away is that while the transcendence of your psychologically embattled, upset self that is involved in a new human condition resolved, upset behavior, obsoleted, cooperative, selfless, and loving conversion also occurs in a religious conversion. In every other respect, it is very different. Firstly, and most significantly, this human condition resolved, upset behaviour, obsoleted new way of living is not a fundamentally irresponsible and weak abandonment of the human race's battle to find understanding, as was the case when deferring to the sound life of a prophet in religion, or, for that matter, to taking up support of any other form of pseudo-idealism, such as socialism or environmentalism or feminism or political correctism, or postmodernism or multiculturalism or anti-capitalism or globalism. No. In stark contrast to these ways of coping with the human condition, this human condition resolved, upset behaviour, obsoleted, new way of living is a completely responsible and entirely strong way of living. As has already been explained, the great problem with obeying our species' instinctive orientation to behave cooperatively and lovingly, to flying back on course in the Adam Stork analogy, is that up until now it meant you had personally given up participating in humanity's corrupting but heroic search for knowledge, ultimately for self-knowledge, the understanding of the human condition that alone could free us from that condition. While it was necessary for people to abandon the corrupting search for knowledge when their experiences from and or participation in that great battle had resulted in them having become too corrupt and destructive in terms of persevering towards our species' ultimate goal, it was fundamentally an irresponsible act of weakness, as the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche recognized. There have always been many sickly people who have a raging hate for the enlightened man and for that youngest of virtues, which is called honesty. You are not yet free. You still search for freedom. Your search has fatigued you, but by my love and hope I entreat you, do not reject the hero in your soul. Keep holy your highest hope. And there comes a time in a culture's history when it becomes so pathologically soft that it takes the side of its worst enemy, takes up support for forms of give up the battle, fly back on course, make you feel good pseudo-idealism, and calls it progress. However, now that our highest hope of finding the enlightening understanding of the human condition has been realized, it is no longer an act of weakness to abandon the battle. In fact, it's now not only an act of strength, it is the only responsible strategy for a human to adopt. Everyone should abandon the battle of the human condition because it is now won and over. There is no reason at all now not to give up the old must prove your worth, power, fame, fortune and glory way of living and participate in this completely responsible and non-pseudo-idealistic new way of living that solves all our and the world's problems. If we look at the Ned Flanders and Homer Simpson situation again, as a born-again Christian, Ned is typically portrayed as having a self-satisfied, I occupy the moral high ground attitude over the still human condition world, Homer Simpson. Ned's smug posturing drives Homer crazy with frustration because Homer intuitively knows Ned is deluding himself in thinking his Christianity gives him the moral high ground, that he is the more together, sound, better person and is on the right track. But without understanding of the human condition, Homer couldn't explain why Ned is so extremely deluded and dishonest in his view of himself. Homer couldn't explain and thus reveal the truth that real idealism and the only truly on-track moral high ground lay with continuing the upsetting battle to find knowledge, and that Ned had become so upset, so unsound, that he had to abandon that all-important battle and leave it to others to continue to fight, including Homer. Worse, in abandoning the battle and, for example, deludedly maintaining that doing so was the solution to the world's problems, Ned has effectively sided against those still trying to win the battle, adding substantially to the opposition they had to overcome. If Homer could have explained the situation, he would have said to Ned, "Listen, Ned, you love Christ and he loves you, and you're a goody-goody, and I'm one upset, corrupted, dysfunctional dude. But Ned, I'm still out there participating in humanity's heroic battle to find knowledge. So, I'm a bold and brave legend, and you're a worn-out quitter." I should explain that while religion is a form of pseudo-idealism because in adopting it, you're fundamentally abandoning the upsetting battle to find understanding, of all the different forms of pseudo-idealism, religions have, by far, been the least destructively dishonest and deluded because of the honesty of the prophet's words about the corrupted state of the human condition. In fact, as the human race has become extremely upset, religions have been losing favor in the West because that honesty and the emphasis on guilt that results from it has become too unbearably confronting and condemning. The great value of religion has become its liability. Chapters 8.16h to 8.16q of Freedom and Freedom Essay 35 document how, as upset has increased, there has been a progression to ever more truth-stripped and guilt-stripped forms of pseudo-idealism that humans have found to adopt, to simplistic, non-thinking, fundamentalist expressions of religion, to a sequence of non-religious pseudo-idealistic causes, in particular from socialism to the New Age movement, to the feminist movement, to the environment movement, to the politically correct movement, and then to the completely truth-stripped postmodern deconstructionist movement. It follows that the amount of dishonesty and delusion in these forms of pseudo-idealism has been infinitely greater than in true religion, and thus infinitely more compromising of and offensive to those like Homer who have been trying to maintain the freedom from idealism needed to continue humanity's heroic search for knowledge. The great danger of the delusion and dishonesty of pseudo-idealism becoming so popular that it ends human freedom and our search for knowledge was summarized by George Orwell in his prophetic book 1984 when he wrote, "If you want a picture of the future, imagine a boot stamping on a human face, the human mind, forever." The perfect example of this is the rise of and acceptance of completely dishonest biology, which, in a terrible death spiral, is then used to justify even more dangerously oppressive left-wing dogma. What we face is the pseudo-idealistic death of the human race. I explain much more about the comparative integrity and critically important, indeed fabulous, contribution religion has made to the human journey in chapters 8.15 and 8.16 of Freedom. So the situation now with the new human condition resolved, upset, obsoleted new way of living is that it is not an act of irresponsibility or weakness to abandon the battle, because that great battle has been won. Understanding of the human condition has been found. So to continue that now obsoleted battle would be illogical and thus irresponsible and thus the weak thing to do. If we imagine then that Ned has taken up the human condition resolved, upset, obsoleted, transformed new way of living, Homer would have no grounds to criticize him. In this scenario, the tables are turned. Ned would be in the position to censure Homer. We are rational creatures, and so when all the logic points to there being only one response we can make, namely the human condition resolved, upset, obsoleted, transformed new way of living, then that is the response the human race has to take. No revolution dogmatically and even physically imposed upon us by others, as has pretty much been the case with revolutions in the past. Just a peaceful revolution through the power of logic, knowledge, understanding. The great revolution of the mind that W.B. Yeats and Sir Bob yearned for. Of course, while it is the power of the logic, the rationale that makes the new transformed way of living irresistible, the adoption of this way of living is also made irresistible by the absolutely wonderful transforming effect it has on people. Indeed, before long, those still living in the old, embattled, have to prove your worth, or deluded, do good to feel good, pseudo-idealistic ways of living will feel like they've been caught wearing last year's fashions. There is such a stark difference between the free, authentic, expansive, enthralled with life, transformed existence and the old embattled existence where your mind is narrowly focused and preoccupied, working all the angles every second of every day, defensively seeking validation and reinforcement, that those living in the old ways will seem like a different species. Compared to the new, expansive, all-exciting, free, transformed state, those still stuck in the old embattled paradigm will be like sad, forgotten ghosts trapped in an obsoleted state. When the scientist-philosopher Pierre Teilhard de Chardin wrote, "The truth has to only appear once, for it to be impossible for anything ever to prevent it from spreading universally and setting everything ablaze," he was anticipating the arrival of the all-transforming and all-exciting understanding of the human condition. I want you to go outside and look up towards the horizon, because I kid you not, what you're soon going to see appear from one end of that horizon to the other is an army in its millions coming to do battle with human suffering, and its weapon will be understanding. With the world's preoccupation with finding self-understanding now resolved, and all the associated need for self-aggrandizement satiated, our lives and the world's resources will be freed to finally look after each other and our world. So while you might have seen some wonderful things in your life, like fields of flowers or gorgeous sunrises or music festivals of people dancing, you won't have seen anything even remotely as incredible, wonderful and joyous as the human race coming home together to peace and happiness. And it has to be remembered that behaving cooperatively and lovingly is our original natural way of behaving. So when we all realize it is now the only legitimate and responsible way to behave, then that way of behaving will come thundering through. Take the boot of repression off the throat of our soul, and it will breathe freely once more. Again, when that truth-talking prophet of our time, Bono, wrote about and sang of a time when we would be able to feel sunlight of liberating understanding, on my face, see that dust cloud of all our upset behavior disappear without a trace, a time when we will be able to take shelter from the poison rain high on a desert plain in a wonderful, egoless new world, where the streets have no name, a place where there will be no toil or sorrow, no time of pain, and everyone will sing, "I've conquered my past, the future is here at last. I stand at the entrance to a new world I can see. The ruins to the right of me will soon have lost sight of me." He was anticipating the arrival, at last, of the human condition free world. The second fundamental difference between this new transformed way of living and religion is that while religions were about supporting the embodiment of the ideals in the form of the prophets around which they were founded, this new way of living is about supporting the understanding of the ideals and why we fully conscious humans have historically not been able to live by them. This is the end of dogma, faith and belief, and the beginning of understanding and knowing. In his acclaimed 1969 BBC television documentary series Civilization, the eminent historian Kenneth Clark mentioned that people who hold forth about the modern world often say that what we need is a new religion. It may be true, but it isn't easy to establish. Saying that what we need is a new religion is really an acknowledgement of the fundamental need, if we are to truly solve the world's problems, for humans to change from living competitively, aggressively and selfishly to living cooperatively, lovingly and selflessly. And saying but it isn't easy to establish a new religion, is really, deep down, a recognition that what is needed for this great change to occur is for understanding of the human condition to be found, because while it wasn't found, the upsetting battle to find it had to continue. Humans have always intuitively known they had to suffer living an upset, corrupted existence until we found self-understanding. We have intuitively been aware that, as it says in the Man of La Mancha, we had to march into hell for a heavenly cause. When it was reported that the Tibetan Buddhist leader, the Dalai Lama, believes secular ethics, not religion, is best placed to assist the moral crisis facing the world's people, because secular ethics respected all traditional faiths as well as non-believers, and quoted the Dalai Lama saying that some people, some my friends, believe moral ethics must be based on religious faith, but no matter how wonderful a religion, it will never be universal. The crisis is universal. Now, the remedy must also be universal. The Dalai Lama was also at base recognizing the need for the reconciling understanding of the human condition to arrive, because only that could supply the universally acceptable remedy of secular ethics he was acknowledging the world needs. When John Lennon, who I consider to be another truth-saying prophet of our time, like Bob Dylan, Bono and Sir Bob Geldof, anticipated in his 1971 song Imagine the arrival of a time when the human condition is resolved and the world will be as one. He too was envisioning a world free of the condemning differentiation of good and evil, a time when there would be no heaven above us and no hell below us, a world liberated from the insecurity of the human condition and thus the need for religion, where, as he sang, there will be nothing to kill or die for, and no religion too, all the people living life in peace, no need for greed or hunger, a brotherhood of man, all the people sharing all the world. This second differentiation to religion leads directly to the third immense difference between this new transformed way of living and a religion, which is that unlike religion, there is no involvement or emphasis on guilt, because guilt and the whole notion of good and evil has been eliminated forever with the reconciling understanding of the human condition. And it raises the fourth fundamental difference about this new transformed way of living, which is that there is no deity involved, no emphasis on God or deference to any one personality. In fact, there is no worship of any kind. The fifth difference this new transformed way of living has to religion also results from it being based on knowledge, not faith or dogma, which is that dogma can't heal upset, only understanding could do that. Ultimately, de-braining ourselves wasn't going to work. We needed brain food, not brain anesthetic. We needed confusion-relieving understanding. We needed answers. Yes, in complete contrast to religion, the new transformed way of living is concerned with what happens after the liberating understanding of the human condition is found, which is the advancement of the human race from the bewildered, insecure, human condition-stricken state of mind to an existence free of that deadening pain in the brain. In fact, it is impossible to express just how redeeming, empowering, and thus rehabilitating it is for the human race to now have a bedrock of first principle scientific knowledge that allows us to understand our fundamental goodness. For humans, knowledge is the ultimate form of power. And this knowledge we now have has reached right to the bottom of the well of who we are, and from there brought an end to the underlying insecurity, confusion, frustration, worry, doubt, shame, guilt, anxiety, and angst that has plagued human life. It has, in short, opened up a whole new world free of the human condition. Yes, the human condition understood, upset, obsoleted, new, transformed way of living, and the psychological healing of the human race that it allows to occur over a few generations completely changes the human race from a state of troubled upset to a state of secure soundness. In fact, it metamorphoses, it matures the whole human race from insecure adolescence to secure adulthood. The sixth very important difference between the new transformed way of living and religion applies both to the power, fame, fortune and glory obsoleted way of validating ourselves and to religion and the various other pseudo-idealistic ways of relieving ourselves of our upset. This key difference is that the new transformed way of living is virtually free of the human condition avoiding dishonesty and delusion involved in those ways of living. With our upset lives now defended, we not only don't have to prove our worth, we don't have to deny any truths about our immensely corrupted condition. And, as was outlined in the bullet points at the end of part 2, there have been a great many truths that resigned humans have been living in denial of. For example, as explained in part 1, science is supposed to be our vehicle for the pursuit of knowledge, but it is now so saturated with lies that it has become a citadel in ruins, as Koestler described it. As I emphasized at the end of part 2, when the blinds are finally drawn on the human condition, the light inevitably reveals a universe of previously denied truths, a litany of heresies. All the lies and delusions we humans have been using to protect ourselves from exposure of our corrupted condition, while we couldn't truthfully explain that condition, are suddenly revealed. The truth reveals the lies as it must. In fact, as I've mentioned there, the arrival of understanding of the human condition brings about Honesty Day, or Truth Day, or Exposure Day, or Transparency Day, or Revelation Day, or the so-called Judgment Day that is referred to many times in the Bible. While, as I stressed, this all-exposing Judgment Day is a time of compassionate understanding, not condemnation, it naturally does come as a great shock to have the extent of our own and our species' now extremely psychologically upset, angry, egocentric and alienated condition suddenly revealed. This paradox of being wonderfully liberated, but at the same time suddenly frighteningly exposed, was recognized by the prophet Isaiah when he said that the liberation that gives you relief from suffering and turmoil and cruel bondage will come with vengeance, with divine retribution to save you. Then will the eyes of the blind be opened and the ears of the deaf unstopped. People will be brought out of Plato's dark cave of denial, where they have been hiding and refusing to hear the truth about their corrupted condition. Your nakedness will be exposed and your shame uncovered on the day of reckoning. In the Quran, the Prophet Muhammad also referred to the day of reckoning and the last judgment, similarly stating that on that day the terror shall come to pass and heaven shall be split. On that day you shall be exposed, not one secret of yours concealed. Yes, as I mentioned at the end of part 1, in his poem The Second Coming, W.B. Yeats referred to humans' great fear of the arrival of the revelation, Judgment Day, all exposing, pitiless as the sun, rough, hurtful beast of the truth about their massively corrupted condition. Humans typically need time to adjust to change, and the arrival of understanding of our corrupted condition is such an immensely significant and sudden event that our ability to adjust to it can't but be overwhelmed. In his famous 1970 book, Future Shock, Alvin Toffler was remarkably prescient in his anticipation of this time when understanding the human condition would emerge and humans would suddenly be faced with, as he put it, the shattering stress and disorientation that we induce in individuals by subjecting them to too much change in too short a time. George Bernard Shaw was another who succinctly described this problem of the sudden change that the arrival of a great insight brings, and the inevitable difficulty and natural resistance people have to making such a significant and sudden change, when, as I mentioned in part 2, he said that all great truths begin as blasphemies. And indeed, there's no greater and more sudden a change than when the redeeming and denial-destroying understanding of the human condition arrives. The question this all raises is, how are we to manage the arrival of the liberating but at the same time all-exposing day of judgment, the day of reckoning, when our nakedness will be exposed and not one secret of ours will be concealed? The simple answer is that we don't try to confront all the truth about our corrupted condition. Once we have investigated these understandings sufficiently to know that they have explained the human condition, we don't actually need to know any more than that to take up a life where we direct all our thoughts and energies into supporting these understandings and to the repair of the world that they finally make possible. We don't need to know the full extent of the truth that this information reveals about the upset state of humanity, and we particularly don't need to know how it explains and reveals everything about our own human condition-afflicted life. What did Bono say we would do when we have conquered the past and the future is here at last? He said, "The ruins to the right of me will soon have lost sight of me." Yes, we don't dwell on the ruins of our corrupted condition. We get the truth up and we move on. Furthermore, if you do become overly confronted by what is being presented, your resigned self's natural reaction could be to try to attack and deny it in order to protect yourself, to in effect reinstate all the denials, which means advocating humanity's retreat back into Plato's dark cave of denial that the human race has been desperately trying to find its way out of for 2 million years. The fact is, if you do become overly confronted, you could become defensive, angry, and retaliatory towards the information, and the consequence of such a response could be to, in effect, sabotage the efforts of every human who has ever lived to bring the human race to this dreamed-of moment of its liberation. In short, the effect of overly studying this information, studying it beyond your degree of soundness or security of self can cope with, can be both dangerous to you and dangerous to the human race. And no one should want nor risk either of those outcomes. Since these understandings of the human condition can be destabilizing for people with a history of psychological instability or serious mental health issues, we strongly encourage such people to seek the ongoing support and assistance of professional counselors for their particular condition. At this early stage of its development, the World Transformation Movement does not have the resources to provide such support and assistance. It makes sense that while the human race heals from its psychosis, a transition that will require a few generations, the more insecure should avoid overly confronting and studying the human condition and entrust that responsibility to those who are more sound. Of course, the effect of this sensible arrangement will be, as it now needs to be, that the more sound, least upset, more soul-connected, least alienated, will be the ones who lead the human race back home to health and happiness. In the past, our instinctive self or soul has been repressed because of its unjust condemnation of our intellect's search for knowledge. But at last, that devastating state of soul separation or alienation or denial is now over. So instead of defensively and evasively emphasizing the intelligent and the intellectual, the emphasis changes to the soulful and instinctual, from IQ to SQ. Yes, just as we encourage and let our soul lead in ourselves now, instead of resigning ourselves to having to repress it, we also let it lead in our society. This healthy change of emphasis was perfectly anticipated by Christ when he spoke of a time when the meek will inherit the earth, and many who are first will be last, and many who are last will be first. And the stone the builders rejected has become the capstone. And by Bob Dylan in his 1964 song, The Times There Are Changing. The slow one now will later be fast, as the present now will later be past. The order is rapidly fading, and the first one now will later be last, for the times they are a-changing. Remember, this emphasis on soul now is not a new form of elitism, because the whole idea of good and bad, superior and inferior, has been eliminated with understanding that upset is a heroic, worthy, and good state. It is true that by not fully confronting the extent of the upset within yourself and avoiding looking too deeply into all the truth about the human condition, you are practicing some denial or dishonesty. But by living in support of the compassionate, full truth about the upset state of the human condition, you are, in the greater scheme of things, ensuring the truth is being fully established and denial fully eliminated. All that really matters now is that this new paradigm of the reconciling and redeeming understanding of the human condition is appreciated and disseminated to the world's population, because it alone can heal the human race and save the world. All everyone should do now is support the truth about the human condition, and it will achieve everything everyone has ever dreamt of. If we look after this information, it, in turn, will look after each of us and the world. That is the mantra of the new world that understanding of the human condition brings about. As I mentioned at the end of part 2, when I was talking about the Judgment Day shock that accompanies the arrival of the truth about the human condition, it is the enormous relief and joy of being able to free ourselves from the human condition that helps us most of all to deal with the sudden arrival of understanding of the human condition. As I said, the procrastinating stage that is characterized by the psychological wrestling match of I don't want to face the truth, I'm in deep shock, this is too big an upheaval and change to my life, it's all an unbearable blasphemy, won't last long once the wonderfully liberating potential of these understandings catches on. So while the psychological upset within humans has not been eliminated, because again, that is the process that will take a few generations, in this new transformed way of living or transformed life force state, there is very little dishonesty, no irresponsibility, no weakness, no delusion, no deity, no worship, no focus on a personality, no faith, no dogma, and no guilt. What we have now is so relieving and so exciting that when this way of living catches on, it will sweep the world. I should say that while the focus for humanity absolutely does now need to be on the adoption of the transformed life force state, some people will want to use the redeeming understanding we now have of the human condition to begin to heal their psychosis, at least any extreme crippling psychosis. Freedom Essays 63 and 64 on the WTM's homepage describe the psychological therapy that is now possible. In summary, now that we understand the very good reason why humans had to set out in search of knowledge and defy our original ideal behavior insisting instinctive self or soul, all the upset, anger, egocentricity, and alienation that unavoidably resulted from being unjustly criticized by our instincts is now rendered obsolete, unnecessary, and meaningless. No longer do we have to retaliate against our instincts' unjust criticism of our search for knowledge. And no longer do we have to retaliate against criticism of our subsequent upset or corrupted state, because our upset or corrupted state has been defended with truthful, compassionate understanding at the most profound level. And no longer do we have to try to prove our worth, because our worth has been established at the most fundamental level. And no longer do we have to deny any confronting truths about our immensely upset or corrupted condition, because no longer are there any truths about our upset or corrupted state that condemn us. Our upset lives are now explained and defended, which means we no longer have to be preoccupied compensating for that upset by finding forms of self-aggrandizement, by seeking self-distraction, or by chasing relief through materialistic forms of compensation for all the hurt we experience growing up in an immensely human condition afflicted world. And nor do we have to delude ourselves that we are an upset-free, ideally behaved person by taking up support of a pseudo-idealistic cause. In other words, we no longer need to artificially make ourselves feel good about ourselves because our goodness has now been established at the deepest, most profound, real level. And, most wonderfully, what happens when we humans give up our old ways of coping with the human condition and take up the new way of living that understanding the human condition has made possible is we naturally transition to a genuinely and authentically cooperative and selflessly behaved person, a truly integrative part of humanity. Even though we are not yet free of the psychologically upset state of our own personal human condition, we can immediately have a change of attitude and decide not to live out that upset state that remains within us. The overall effect in our lives is that despite our retention of the upset state of the human condition, we are effectively free from its hold and its influence, which is an absolutely fabulous transformation to have made in an instant, in one simple decision. You and every other human can, as it were, put the issue of all our upset or corruptions in a suitcase, attach a label to it saying, everything in here is now explained and defended, and simply leave that suitcase behind at the entrance to what we in the World Transformation Movement call the Sunshine Highway, and set out unencumbered by all those upset behaviors into a new world that is effectively free of the human condition. You can join the Sunshine Army on the Sunshine Highway to the world in sunshine. All the egocentric, embattled posturing to get a win out of life, all the strategizing every minute of every day to try and find a way to compensate for feeling inadequate or imperfect or bad about ourselves, can suddenly end. The human race can leave Plato's dark cave where it has been hiding to escape the glare of the truth about its seemingly imperfect condition. And when we simply leave our whole must prove and artificially maintain our sense of worth, attack and deny any criticism way of living behind as obsolete, all our thoughts and energies can finally be redirected into supporting and disseminating these human race saving understandings and to repairing the world from all the damage our species' upset behavior has caused. Because with the human condition solved, all the upset that is causing the destruction of the planet can now end, which means it is at last possible to properly and permanently repair our environment. Excitement and meaning based on liberating, truthful, honest understanding of ourselves and our world is what we have to sustain ourselves now. The immense excitement and relief of being effectively free of the human condition, the joy and happiness of being liberated from the burden of our insecurities, self-preoccupations, and devious strategizing, the awesome meaning and power of finally being genuinely aligned with the truth and actually participating in the magic, true world, the wonderful empathy and equality of goodness, and fellowship that understanding of the human condition now allows us to feel for our fellow humans, the freedom now to effectively focus on repairing the world, and above all, the radiant aliveness from the optimism that comes with knowing our species' march through hell has finally ended, and that a human condition-free new world is coming, can now transform every human and thus the world. From being a human condition oppressed and depressed, alienated person, you and all other humans can now be transformed into redeemed, liberated from the human condition, exhilarated, ecstatic, enthralled with existence, empowered, world-transforming life forces. This exhilarated, ecstatic, enthralled with existence aspect is the life in life force, while the empowered, world-transforming aspect is the force in life force. So life force covers both the personal benefit and the benefit to the world in one word, being human condition stricken, Plato's dark cave dwelling, effectively dead humans, we become transformed life forces or simply life forces. That is the difference the arrival of understanding of the human condition makes to the human race. To confirm all that has been said, I recommend you watch some short videos in which World Transformation Movement members describe their own transformation to a fabulous life in the new Human Condition Understood world at www.humancondition.com/affirmations. Again, Chapter 9 of Freedom contains the full description of how understanding of the human condition is able to immediately transform your life and the lives of all humans. Finally, as mentioned in the notes to the reader, while copies of Transform Your Life and Save the World and Freedom can be purchased from bookshops, including Amazon, what they are presenting is so important they are and will always remain freely available to read, print or share at our website www.humancondition.com. So please introduce others to this understanding of the human condition by telling them they can immediately, easily and for no charge read this short booklet, because the explanation it contains is the only thing that can save the human race from unthinkably horrific and appalling terminal levels of writhing and deadening alienation, soul separation and psychosis. Appendix. An appendix is included at the end of Transform Your Life titled Summary of Our Species' Heroic Journey from Ignorance to Enlightenment. Taken from Chapter 8 of Freedom, it includes a sequence of fossil skulls of our ancestors, as well as the series of drawings Jeremy created showing the stages that he describes the human race as progressing through. Here ends Transform Your Life and Save the World. You've been listening to Transform Your Life and Save the World, written by Jeremy Griffith, read by Tim McCartney-Snape. Transform Your Life was first published in 2016 by WTM Publishing Communications, and this audiobook is of the slightly revised second edition, published in 2019. This book is protected by Australian copyright laws and international copyright treaty provisions, all rights reserved. Copyright 2016 to 2019, BedMex Proprietary Limited. All inquiries should be made to the World Transformation Movement at www.humancondition.com. I'm Tim McCartney-Snape. Thanks for listening.